The Making of the Modern Middle East, A Personal History, written and read by Jeremy Bowen. To my family, as always. Prologue. On the 15th of February 1989, the last day of the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, I peered through the wire at Kabul airport, watching as the last Soviet soldiers and some wives and children in quiet and well-behaved lines walked up the steps of a small airliner that looked as if it had taken too many trips into the war. The aircraft climbed steeply, spiraling high, to make it a harder target for the guerrilla fighters of the Mujahideen in the mountains that surround Kabul. The Soviets left behind an airport, scattered with broken warplanes, a communist government that was fighting for its life, and their own equivalent of America's Vietnam disaster. The last act of the occupation, carried live on state television, was the departure of a column of armoured personnel carriers, red banners flying, over the Friendship Bridge into Soviet Uzbekistan. Colonel General Boris Gromov, commander of the limited contingent of Soviet forces in Afghanistan, stopped his vehicle to walk over the last section of the bridge. His son was waiting on Soviet soil with a bunch of red carnations. Since the USSR invaded on the 24th of December 1979, nearly 2 million Afghans, mostly civilians, had been killed, along with around 15,000 Soviet soldiers. Gromov did not look back. As the Western world celebrated Christmas Day in 1991, the red flag with the hammer and sickle was lowered over the Kremlin for the last time. A few days earlier, state television in Moscow had announced that the USSR no longer exists. In Kabul, the communist government of President Mohammad Najibullah had outlasted the USSR. He was overthrown the following year when the Mujahideen entered the city. 4 years later, he would be taken from UN detention by the Taliban and tortured to death before his body was dragged through the streets. I watched the final Soviet act in Afghanistan without being able to report on it because I was being detained after failing to talk my way into the country without a visa. After a day or two in a small windowless room, the guards had worked out I was harmless and let me sit in the sun on a small patch of grass that was separated from the airstrip by a wire fence. I lost myself in the hubris of 1980s New York City, in Tom Wolfe's Bonfire of the Vanities, feeling nothing like a master of the universe as I pondered how to extricate myself. The Afghans would not let me in, but they wouldn't let me leave either. I'd just celebrated my 29th birthday, and getting assigned to a story in Kabul was a big step in my reporting career. It had been a gamble to send me there without a visa, so the potato curry the guards had shared, in return for some of my whiskey, churned inside me with the gnawing feeling that a reporter with the right stuff might have found a way in. I had no idea that the events I saw would shape some of the biggest stories I was going to be reporting for the next 30 years or more. The end of the USSR is a small part of a story about the Middle East. Its defeat in Afghanistan was less important than the way it happened and the seeds it sowed outside the Soviet Union. The Americans funded the Afghan Mujahideen's fight against the Soviets, a war that was enthusiastically joined by a generation of Islamist radicals, mostly Arabs, who traveled to Afghanistan to fight and went home as seasoned jihadists. Many embarked on a lifelong fight for the victory of their versions of Islam. Among them were a Saudi, Osama bin Laden, and an Egyptian, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the two top men in al-Qaeda when it attacked the United States on the 11th of September 2001. In 1989, it became clear that the old planet we had grown up
Sample complete. Ready to continue?